The distinct, sharp sound of a deadbolt clicking into place. A moment of comfortable, absolute silence. That is the sound of safety. The sound that separates you from the world. It's the sound that says, I am home, I am alone, and I am secure. But listen closer. In the quiet, your house has its own language. A floorboard groans under a weight that is not yours. A pipe shudders in the wall with a sound almost like a whisper. Welcome, dwellers of the dark, to Nocturnal Nightmares TV. Tonight, we share 5 true and terrifying stories from people who discovered that the most horrifying sounds are the ones you can identify. The ones that sound almost human. Pay attention to the sounds of your house. It might be trying to warn you that you are not, in fact, alone at all. Story 1. The deadline the first time the phone rang. I almost didn't answer it. It was a Tuesday night. I was 15, and my parents had left me home alone for the first time on a weeknight. A massive thunderstorm was raging outside, and the power had been flickering for an hour. The phone was an ancient, mustard-yellow rotary phone in the kitchen, a relic my dad kept for nostalgic reasons. We didn't even have a landline subscription. The phone was a prop, a piece of disconnected history. So when its shrill, metallic ring cut through the roar of the storm, my blood turned to ice. It rang 3 times before I cautiously picked up the heavy receiver. "Hello," I said, my voice trembling. All I heard was static, a sound like a million tiny insects hissing down the line. I was about to hang up when a voice broke through the noise. It was a woman's voice, faint and reedy, like a distant radio signal. "Can you hear me? It's so dark in here." I slammed the phone down, my heart hammering against my ribs. It had to be a crossed wire, a freak accident of the storm. That was the only logical explanation. I stood in the kitchen, staring at the phone, willing it to stay silent. It did. After a few minutes, my breathing returned to normal. I had imagined the voice. The static had played tricks on my ears. I went back to the living room, but the sense of safety was gone. Every clap of thunder made me flinch. Every flicker of the lights sent a jolt of anxiety through me. An hour later, the phone rang again. This time, I was determined to be brave, to prove to myself it was nothing. I picked it up. The static was there, but the voice was clearer, closer. It was my grandmother, a voice I hadn't heard in 5 years, not since her funeral. "Honey," she whispered, her voice exactly as I remembered it, frail and papery. "I can't find my glasses. Your grandfather is waiting for me." I dropped the receiver as if it were red hot. It clattered against the wall, dangling from its coiled cord. This wasn't a crossed wire. This was impossible. This was insane. I was having some kind of breakdown, a grief-induced hallucination. I backed away from the kitchen, leaving the phone off the hook, the static hissing into the empty room. I huddled on the living room couch, pulling a blanket around me, my eyes wide in the dark. The storm raged on. Through the hiss of the dangling receiver, the voice came again, no longer faint, but clear and conversational, as if she was standing right in the kitchen. "It's a nice picture, honey. The one of you on the boat. You look so happy. I froze. There was a framed photo on the kitchen counter from our family vacation last summer. A photo my grandmother had never seen. The voice wasn't just a memory. It was observing. It was in my house, watching me through the phone. The phone was its eye, its mouth. My terror was so complete, it became a strange, cold clarity. I had to cut the connection. I ran to the basement, fumbled for the flashlight, and found the utility box on the wall. The phone line, a thick grey cable, came in through the wall and connected to a small junction box. I found my dad's old wire cutters. My hands shaking, I closed the jaws of the cutters around the thick cable and squeezed. It was tough, but with a final, desperate grunt, I severed it. The cable snapped apart with a dull twang. It was done. The line was dead. I felt a profound sense of relief. I had cut the head off the snake. I walked back upstairs. The receiver was still dangling, but the static was gone. It was silent, utterly, beautifully silent. I had one. I spent the rest of the night on the couch, too terrified to sleep. But the silence held. The storm passed. The sun came up. My parents came home, and I never told them what happened. How could I? A week passed. A month. The incident faded, becoming a strange, traumatic memory that I convinced myself was a dream, a hallucination, a perfect storm of grief and isolation. Then, one Saturday, I was home alone again. It was a bright, sunny afternoon. I was in the kitchen, making a sandwich, and the yellow rotary phone on the wall began to ring. It wasn't a dream. I was wide awake. The line was cut. It was physically impossible for it to be ringing. Yet the shrill, metallic breathing filled the silent house. I stared at it, paralyzed, for a full minute. Then, with a sense of resigned dread, I picked up the receiver. There was no static, just a perfect, crystal-clear silence. And then a voice. My grandmother's voice. But it wasn't frail or confused anymore. It was cold, clear, and filled with a chilling, triumphant malice. "You can't hang up on us, honey," it said. "We were never in the wires." And from the other end of the house, from my parents' bedroom, I heard a second phone begin to ring. Then the one in the basement. I hadn't cut off their connection. I had just made them find a new way to call. And this time, they weren't just in the kitchen. They were all over the house. Story 2. The scent of the soil. The first thing I noticed when I moved into the old rental house was the smell. It was a faint, earthy scent, like damp soil and old, wet leaves after a rainstorm. It wasn't unpleasant, just persistent. I bought air fresheners, burned incense, mopped the old hardwood floors until they shone. Nothing touched it. The smell was part of the house, woven into its very bones. I was a graduate student on a tight budget, and the house was all I could afford. I decided I could live with the smell of a perpetual autumn in my living room. I was home alone most of the time. My life, a quiet cycle of research and writing. The loneliness didn't bother me, but the house began to... The earthy smell would grow stronger at night, becoming thick and cloying, almost suffocating. It seemed to emanate from a specific spot, the small, deep closet at the end of the main hallway. The closet had a strange, uneven floor, a patch of what felt like bare, packed earth that the landlord had tried to cover with a cheap piece of linoleum. I assumed it was a quirk of the house's old foundation. One night, I woke up with a jolt. The smell was overpowering, so thick it was almost a taste. And I heard a sound, a soft, wet, tearing sound, coming from the hallway closet. I crept out of bed and pressed my ear to the closet door. The sound was clearer now, a sound like thick roots slowly twisting and breaking through dry earth. I told myself it was the house settling, the pipes groaning. I told myself a lot of things in that house. The next morning, the linoleum in the closet was buckled, a small mound of fresh, dark soil pushing up from beneath it. I stared at it, a cold dread seeping into my bones. This wasn't the house settling. This was the house growing. I called the landlord, a gruff, disinterested man who lived 3 states away. He told me it was probably a drainage problem, that he'd send someone out eventually. Eventually never came. The mound of earth in the closet grew day by day, pushing the linoleum up like a grotesque tumor. The earthy smell now filled the entire house, a constant, damp reminder that something was wrong. I started keeping the closet door shut, stuffing a towel under it to block the scent, trying to pretend it wasn't there. But I could still hear the sounds at night, the slow, patient tearing of roots, the soft, wet shifting of soil. One Friday night, I came home late from the library, exhausted. As I walked down the hallway, I noticed something strange. Put a thin, dark tendril, like a pale root, was snaking its way out from under the closet door. It was about a foot long, and it was twitching like a worm on a hook. I watched, mesmerized and horrified, as it slowly, deliberately, began to drag itself back under the door, disappearing into the darkness of the closet. I should have left then. I should have packed a bag and slept in my car. But I was paralyzed by a morbid academic curiosity. What was this thing? A strange type of fungus, an invasive root system from an old tree. I had to know. Armed with a flashlight and a small garden trowel, I opened the closet door. The sight that greeted me was a biological nightmare. The entire floor of the closet was gone, replaced by a churning, writhing mass of pale roots and dark, loamy soil. The mound had grown into a small hillock, and from its center grew a shape. It was vaguely humanoid, a dense, tangled mass of roots and earth that had formed itself into a torso, a head, and 2 long, spindly arms. It was a living sculpture of soil and roots, and as I shone my flashlight on it, the head, a featureless lump of mud and tangled rootlets, slowly turned to face me. I stumbled backward, dropping the trowel, my mind screaming. It was alive, a sentient, terrestrial entity that was growing up through the foundation of my house. I slammed the closet door shut and fumbled with the old skeleton key, locking it. I spent the night on the couch, the key clutched in my hand, listening to the soft, insistent thumping against the other side of the closet door. The next morning, the thumping was gone. The house was silent. The earthy smell, for the first time, had receded. I hoped, that maybe it had given up, that it had retreated back into the earth. But when I went to the kitchen to make coffee, I saw it, the floor vent. From the metal grill, a single pale rootlet was emerging, its tip twitching, feeling the air. It hadn't given up. It had just found a new way out. It was in the vents. It was in the walls. It was spreading through the house like a cancer. I finally understood the truth. I wasn't living in a house built on the earth. The house was a cage, a terrarium, built around something that was growing from the earth. The smell wasn't just a smell. It was its breath. The roots weren't just roots. They were its limbs. And I wasn't a tenant. I was an infestation, an invasive species in its quiet, dark, growing home. And it was finally taking measures to remove me. Story 3. The replacement, the first sign that my life was being subtly rewritten, was the pizza. I was home alone, grading papers, when the doorbell rang. It was a delivery guy, holding a large pepperoni pizza. "That'll be $24.50, he said. I stared at him, confused. I didn't order a pizza, I told him. He checked the receipt, frowned, and confirmed my address. "Well, someone did," he grumbled, before taking the pizza and leaving. I shut the door, a little unsettled. A prank, a wrong address. I brushed it off, but the oddities continued. The next morning, I found a coffee mug in the sink that I didn't remember using. The day after that, the TV was on a channel I never watched when I came home from work. They were small, insignificant things, the kind of things that make you question your own memory, your own sanity. Am I that forgetful? Am I that stressed? I started leaving little tests for myself. I'd place a book on my nightstand at a specific angle. When I'd wake up, it would be perfectly straight. I'd leave the toothpaste cap off. In the morning, it would be screwed on tight. Someone was in my house when I was asleep or away. Someone who was neat, tidy, and who looked exactly like me. I installed a small security camera, a cheap one, disguised as a smoke detector in my living room. I needed proof. I needed to see the person who was slowly, methodically gaslighting me in my own home. I went to work, my stomach in knots, and checked the live feed on my phone every half hour. Nothing, just an empty, silent apartment. I came home that evening, my shoulders slumped with a strange mixture of relief and disappointment. I sat down to review the day's footage, fast-forwarding through the hours of empty rooms. And then I saw it. The timestamp was 2:15 p.m. The front door of my apartment opened, and I walked in. I watched myself on the screen, a perfect copy, wearing the same clothes I had left for work in that morning. The copy walked to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and took a long drink. It then walked over to the bookshelf, took down a book, and placed it back on the shelf, but in a different spot. It was correcting my mistakes. It was tidying up. After a few minutes, it walked back to the front door, gave a small, satisfied nod, and left. I felt the world tilt. My breath hitched. This wasn't a stranger. It was a doppelgänger, a perfect, meticulous copy that was living a parallel life, using my home as its own. Was it trying to take over, to replace me? I scrolled through the footage from the previous day. I found the moment, 7:30 p.m., the time the pizza had been delivered. I watched as my double picked up the phone, ordered the pizza, and then left the apartment just minutes before the delivery guy arrived. It hadn't made a mistake. It had just forgotten that I would be home. My terror was cold and absolute. I was being stalked by myself. I decided to confront it. I would stay home from work the next day, sit in the dark, and wait for my double to arrive. I would see who this thing was, but I never got the chance. The next morning, as I was getting ready to call in sick, I glanced out my bedroom window, and I saw him, my double. He was on the street below, walking away from my building, heading in the direction of my office. He was wearing my favorite blue coat. He was me, and he was going to work for me. An idea so insane, so horrifying, that it almost made me laugh, bloomed in my mind. I ran to the security camera footage on my phone. I rewound it to the moment the double had first appeared yesterday. I watched it walk in, tidy up, and leave. I kept watching. And then, at 5:30 p.m., the front door opened again, and I walked in. The me that was currently sitting in the apartment. The me that had set up the camera. The footage showed me coming home from work, sitting on the couch, watching TV. There were two of us, a day shift me and a night shift me. We were living in the same apartment, in the same life, but on a perfectly split schedule, never interacting. Each one cleaning up the other's small messes, each one convinced he was the sole occupant. But which one was the original? The thought was a physical blow. The strange feelings of forgetfulness, the small memory lapses. What if they weren't because I was being gaslit? What if they were because I didn't have the memories? What if I wasn't the one being replaced? What if I was the replacement? As I sat there, my entire reality crumbling around me, I heard a sound that made my soul turn to ice. A key sliding into the lock of the front door. I looked at the clock. It was 9:15 a.m. The other me, the one who went to work, he had forgotten something. He was coming back, and he was about to find me in his apartment. He was about to find the mistake, the glitch in the system, the copy that had stayed home when it was supposed to have disappeared. The door swung open. I saw my own face, contorted in a mask of shock and dawning, murderous rage. And I finally understood that the real horror wasn't about an intruder trying to get into my home. It was about realizing that I was the intruder, and the rightful owner had just come home to find me. Story 4. The Game of the Crooked Man. I must have been about 8 years old. A latchkey kid in a new town, and my greatest enemy was boredom. My parents worked late, and the long summer afternoons in our empty, silent house stretched into an eternity. To pass the time, I invented a game. It was a game of make-believe, played with my vast collection of action figures. I created a villain for them, a monster I called the Crooked Man. He was an amalgamation of every scary story I'd ever heard. a tall, thin creature with a broken, twisted neck and a wide, stitched-in smile. The rules of the game were simple, and I made them up as I went along. The crooked man could only move when you weren't looking at him. He could hide in any shadow, and his goal was to collect all the other toys, one by one, and take them back to his crooked house. I would spend hours setting up elaborate scenarios, positioning my heroes in defensive formations around the living room. Then I would turn my back, count to 10, and turn back around. And I would move the crooked man, an old, broken puppet I'd found in the attic, a little closer to his prey. It was a fun, simple game, until the game started playing itself. It began with small things. I'd leave my action figures set up on the floor when I went to get a snack. When I'd come back, one of the figures would be knocked over. I'd assume I had bumped it without realizing. Then a figure would be missing. I'd find it later, under the couch, or in a different room entirely. My 8-year-old brain attributed it to my own forgetfulness. But the incidents grew more specific, more unsettling. I had a specific jail for the toys the crooked man had captured. An empty shoebox in my closet. One afternoon, I came back to the living room to find my favorite action figure, Captain Steel, was gone. I searched everywhere. Finally, with a growing sense of dread, I went to my closet and opened the shoebox. Captain Steel was lying inside, on top of the other captured toys. I had not put him there. A cold, childish fear began to take root. I felt like I was being watched. The shadows in the corners of the rooms seemed darker, deeper. The creaks and groans of the old house no longer sounded random. They sounded like footsteps. The footsteps of something tall and thin and crooked. I tried to stop playing the game, but it was too late. I would put all my toys away in their chest, and when I'd come back later, they would be out again, set up in a new, terrified formation, with the crooked man puppet looming over them from a shadowy corner. The game was no longer mine to control. It had its own rules now. The worst night, I was trying to watch a movie, huddled on the couch, pretending everything was normal. I had locked the crooked man puppet in the attic, hoping to end the game for good. I heard a faint, scratching sound from the hallway. I peeked around the corner. The hallway was dark, but I could just make out a figure standing at the far end. It was one of my action figures, a small, plastic army man. It was just standing there, in the middle of the hall. As I watched, it slowly, impossibly, raised its tiny plastic arm and pointed towards the attic stairs. I screamed and ran back to the couch, pulling a blanket over my head. This wasn't my imagination. This was real. The thing I had created, the monster from my game, was real. And it was using my toys as its messengers, as its pawns. The rule I had invented, that he could only move when I wasn't looking, wasn't just a rule. It was a law of nature for this thing. And my entire house was its game board. I sat there, trembling, for what felt like hours. I knew I had to face it. I had to end this. It was my game. I had to be the one to finish it. With a courage I didn't know I possessed, I stood up and walked to the hallway. The army man was gone. I looked at the floor. The small plastic figure was now at the bottom of the attic stairs, pointing upwards. I took a deep breath and started to climb. The attic was pitch black and silent. I fumbled for the light switch, a single bare bulb hanging from a cord. I pulled it. The attic was empty, filled with dusty boxes and old furniture covered in white sheets. The crooked man puppet was gone from the chest where I had locked it. I scanned the room, my heart pounding, looking in every corner, behind every box. Nothing. A wave of relief washed over me. Maybe it was gone. Maybe it had just disappeared. As I turned to leave, my foot kicked something on the floor. It was the crooked man puppet, lying on its back in the middle of the room. Its stitched-in smile seemed to mock me. I had won. The game was over. I had faced my fear and found nothing but a stupid, broken toy. I let out a shaky, relieved laugh. And then I saw the shadow on the wall behind me. It was cast by the single, bare bulb hanging from the ceiling. It was the shadow of a man, a tall, thin man, his neck bent at a sickening, broken angle. And as I watched, paralyzed, the shadow of his hand, a hand with long, spindly, crooked fingers, slowly rose and reached for the light cord. The last thing I saw before the world went black was the puppet on the floor, its head slowly turning to look at me, its stitched-in smile seeming to stretch impossibly wide. I had made a terrible mistake. The puppet wasn't the crooked man. It was just another one of his toys. Story 5. The voice on the baby monitor. The job was simple. Babysit a 6-month-old infant for a single night while his wealthy, workaholic parents attended a charity gala. I was 17, a senior in high school, and the pay was ridiculously good. The house was a modern palace, a sprawling glass sand steel structure in a gated community. It felt less like a home and more like an art gallery. It was beautiful, but cold, sterile, and unnervingly quiet. After the parents, the Davidsons, left, the silence was absolute. The only sound was the soft, rhythmic breathing of the baby, Leo. Coming through the high-tech baby monitor receiver I held in my hand, I settled onto a large, white leather couch in the living room, the receiver on the coffee table beside me. For the first few hours, everything was peaceful. Leo's soft breaths were a comforting, constant presence. Around 10 p.m., the static started. A soft, crackling hiss began to emanate from the receiver, partially obscuring the sound of the baby's breathing. I fiddled with the settings, assuming it was interference from a neighbor's device or a stray radio signal. The static persisted. Then, through the hiss, I heard a new sound, a voice. It was a woman's voice, low and melodic, and she was humming a lullaby. It was a tune I had never heard before, ancient and mournful. My first thought was that the monitor was picking up a feed from another house. I was about to turn it off when Leo, who had been stirring, suddenly went quiet. The humming seemed to be soothing him, a little weird but harmless. I decided to leave it, not wanting to risk waking the baby. An hour later, Leo started to cry, a thin, wailing sound that cut through the humming and the static. I was about to get up and go to him when the voice on the monitor spoke. It was no longer humming. It was speaking in a language I didn't recognize, a string of soft, guttural syllables. It sounded like she was whispering directly into the microphone of the monitor in Leo's room. Her voice was calm, reassuring, and after a moment, Leo's crying stopped. He was completely silent. A cold, heavy dread began to settle in the pit of my stomach. This wasn't interference. The voice was interacting with the baby. There was someone in the nursery. I grabbed the heaviest object I could find, a glass paperweight and my cell phone. MY thumb hovering over the 911. I crept up the floating glass staircase, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The second floor was a long, dark hallway, with the nursery at the far end. As I got closer, I could hear the voice, not just from the receiver in my hand, but faintly through the closed nursery door. She was in there. I stood outside the door for a long moment, paralyzed by fear. What should I do? Burst in, call the police, and wait. As I stood there, hesitating, the voice on the monitor in my hand changed. It stopped speaking its strange language. It was now whispering in perfect, unaccented English, its voice as smooth and cold as silk. "He's a beautiful child," it whispered, "so full of potential, so easy to shape." That was it. I didn't care anymore. I threw the nursery door open, ready to confront whoever was in there. The room was empty. It was a pristine, modern nursery, bathed in the soft glow of a rocket ship nightlight. In the center of the room, Leo was sleeping soundly in his crib, his tiny chest rising and falling in a peaceful rhythm. There was no one there, no woman, no intruder. I scanned the room, my mind reeling. The window was locked. The closet was empty. I was alone with the baby. A wave of relief, so powerful it almost made my knees buckle, washed over me. I had imagined it. The stress of the big, empty house. The strange sounds on the monitor it had all been a figment of my overwrought imagination. I let out a shaky laugh. I was an idiot. I walked over to the crib to check on Leo. He was fine, not a care in the world. On the dresser beside the crib was the baby monitor's transmitter, its small green power light glowing steadily. As I stood there, the receiver in my hand crackled to life. It was the woman's voice again, clear as a bell, with no static this time. "You shouldn't have come up here," it whispered. I froze, the receiver suddenly feeling like a block of ice in my hand. I stared at the transmitter on the dresser. The voice wasn't coming from the nursery. It had never been coming from the nursery. The monitor wasn't picking up a signal from an intruder. The monitor was the intruder. It was a haunted object, a conduit for something that had been whispering its strange, ancient lullabies to this child every single night. The parents, sleeping in their room down the hall, would have only heard the static, assuming it was a faulty device. But I was awake, I was listening, and I had heard it all. The voice came again, a silken, predatory purr, coming directly from the small speaker I held inches from my ear. "He is almost ready, but you are a loose end." I threw the receiver across the room. It shattered against the wall. But the voice didn't stop. It was inside my head now, a clear, melodic whisper, echoing in the hollows of my skull. And as I turned to run, I heard the transmitter on the dresser crackle to life. It wasn't whispering anymore. It was humming. It was humming that same beautiful, mournful lullaby. But this time, it wasn't for the baby. It was for me. And I could feel my own eyelids growing heavy, a profound, irresistible sleepiness washing over me. The lullaby pulling me down into a dark, silent place, where I would be so easy to shake.